The night was thick with the weight of danger and silence, broken only by distant sirens and the restless whispers of the city's restless underbelly. On a narrow, dimly lit street where shadows stretched long and cold, a figure moved quickly, small, wiry, and alert. He was no stranger to these parts. He'd grown up here, in a world where every glance could mean a threat, and every step had to be measured with care. Poverty was not just a fact of life, but a presence that hung heavy in the air, wrapping itself around him like a second skin. As he rounded a corner, something caught his eye, a flurry of motion, harsh voices, a sudden rush of chaos. Ahead, a woman was being overwhelmed by a group of men whose intentions were clear and cruel. She was outnumbered, cornered against the cold brick wall, her elegant clothes torn and dirtied. She was a stranger here, out of place, but that didn't stop the boy from reacting. Without hesitation, the world around him faded into a narrow tunnel of focus. Fear was there, yes, but something else was stronger, a fierce, burning urge to help. He didn't stop to weigh the danger or question the wisdom. Instinct took over, and he charged toward them, shouting to draw attention, his voice raw but steady. The attackers, startled by this unexpected interference, hesitated just long enough for him to grab the woman's arm and pull her away from the snarling crowd. The tension in the air snapped as the men backed off, their threats fading into angry curses, their eyes promising that this wasn't over. The woman stumbled, breathless, leaning heavily on the boy for support. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but beneath the grime was unmistakable. A face that had known wealth, privilege, a life far removed from the hardships etched into his own skin. Yet here they were, two souls thrown together by chance and necessity, standing in the dark heart of a city that showed no mercy. She whispered her thanks, a voice trembling but resolute. There was a vulnerability in her tone that caught him off guard, a softness beneath the harsh surface of the night. For a moment, the street seemed to hold its breath, the usual dangers receding like a tide, leaving only the fragile human connection between them. He looked at her closely, her hands delicate but shaking, the way her eyes flickered with a strange mixture of fear and gratitude. He wondered what story she carried, what burdens lay beneath her polished exterior. There was a world between them, invisible but palpable, made up of countless unseen struggles and silent battles. Despite the danger they had just escaped, he felt an odd sense of calm settle over him. The harshness of his own life, the daily grind of survival, had prepared him in ways that no amount of schooling or privilege ever could. And in that moment he realized that courage was not about money or status. It was about standing up when it mattered most, about breaking through the walls that divide people and reaching out, even when the odds were against you. As they moved away from the street, the distant hum of the city returned, a reminder that the world kept turning, indifferent and relentless, but something had shifted. The boy understood that the night had offered him more than a chance to save a stranger. It had given him a glimpse into the hidden complexities of life, the intertwined fates of those who walk different paths but share the same fragile humanity. Though he couldn't know what the future held, he felt a quiet resolve growing inside him, a determination to face whatever came next with the same fierce heart that had pushed him forward in the darkest moment. The night was far from over, and the story unfolding between them was just beginning. After the chaos had settled, they found a quiet corner away from the shadows and the lingering threat of those men. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and something else, an unspoken tension that neither of them knew how to break. The woman's breathing was uneven, and her eyes darted nervously as if the danger was still clawing at her heels. Then, leaning in close, she whispered something so unexpected and delicate that it stopped him in his tracks. Her voice was barely audible, trembling with a vulnerability that no one in his world had ever shown him before. The words weren't a simple thank you or a plea for help. No, they carried a weight far greater than gratitude. She told him about the loneliness that hid behind her polished smile and the endless pressure of living a life that demanded perfection. She spoke of battles no one could see, the hollow victories, the cold silences of a world that looked at her like she was untouchable but never truly knew her. Her confession was raw, honest, a secret whispered in the dark that shattered the distance between their worlds. For a moment the boy's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a deep, aching empathy. He saw beyond the millionaire's facade to the human being beneath, a person scarred by struggles that money couldn't fix. Her voice cracked as she told him how trapped she felt, how suffocating the gilded cage of wealth had become. His own life had been a constant fight for survival, filled with harsh lessons and unforgiving nights. Yet here was someone who had it all on the surface but suffered in ways he never imagined. Her words stirred something inside him, confusion, sadness, a quiet hope that maybe, despite their differences, pain was something they both understood. He struggled to find a response, to offer comfort or reassurance, but the raw honesty of her whisper left him speechless. It was as if in that one breath, she had broken through every barrier built by society and circumstance. She was no longer just the wealthy woman who needed saving. She was someone whose story intertwined with his own in that fragile moment. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken understanding, a fragile connection forged in vulnerability. She looked at him with eyes that held a mix of sorrow and gratitude, and he realized that the night had changed them both in ways neither could yet fully grasp. As they stood there, the distant sounds of the city seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the quiet echo of a truth that neither had dared to speak aloud before. The millionaire's whispered confession was a reminder that beneath every surface, no matter how shiny, there were hidden battles, wounds that cut deep, and a longing to be truly seen. In that fleeting moment, the boy felt the weight of her words settle over him like a fragile thread, connecting two lives from opposite ends of the spectrum. And though the world outside remained harsh and unforgiving, something inside him shifted, opening a space where empathy could grow. He didn't know what the future held or how their paths might cross again, but her whispered truth left an indelible mark. It was a secret shared in the dark, a fragile bridge between wealth and poverty, strength and vulnerability, loneliness and hope. The night pressed on, but the boy stood still for a heartbeat longer, holding on to the whispered words that had pierced through the silence, and through him, here's the expanded version of Keynote No. 3, about 700 words, continuing the story from where we left off, without ending sentences. After she whispered those words, he stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of everything he had just heard. The raw honesty in her voice had shattered any simple ideas he might have had about wealth or power. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about a deep loneliness and pain hidden beneath all the luxury. His mind raced, struggling to unpack the weight of her confession, a burden so unlike anything he had ever been taught to expect from someone like her. He looked at her closely, searching for clues in her eyes. Were they pleading for help, or just desperately wanting someone to understand? She seemed fragile, but there was also a fierce strength in the way she held herself, a strength born from years of hiding her scars from the world. This moment wasn't just about her safety anymore. It was about the invisible wounds that she carried and the loneliness that made her whisper those words to a stranger on a street nobody else dared to walk at night. He thought about his own life, filled with struggles that were loud and obvious, hunger, fear, the constant fight just to get by. His pain had always been visible, a part of his daily reality, but hers was different. It was silent, hidden behind designer clothes and expensive cars, a secret burden she had carried alone despite the crowds that surrounded her. The more he tried to understand, the more complicated it felt. The boy's heart ached with a mix of confusion and empathy. How could someone so rich feel so empty? How could she whisper of isolation when she seemed to have everything? It was a puzzle that twisted his thoughts, breaking down the walls of judgment he didn't realize he had built. He realized that pain doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. It lives in the quiet corners of every soul, waiting to be seen. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the weight of her words, but nothing came out. Instead, he just listened, letting the silence between them fill with unspoken understanding. It was a strange feeling, being trusted with someone's secret, especially someone he barely knew, but whose vulnerability now felt like a fragile thread linking them together. His mind replayed her whisper again and again, each time catching a different emotion beneath the surface: fear, regret, hope, and a longing for connection. It made him wonder how many people around him were fighting invisible battles of their own, hidden behind masks and walls. He felt a sudden, fierce desire to protect that fragile hope, not just for her but for himself too. But alongside empathy was also a creeping uncertainty. He wasn't sure if he could really grasp the world she came from, or if she could understand his. Their lives seemed so far apart, divided by invisible walls built by circumstance and history. Could anyone truly cross those divides? Could someone born into hardship find common ground with someone born into privilege? And if so, what would that mean for both of them? As these questions swirled inside him, he realized that the moment had changed everything. The streets that had once seemed just dangerous and unforgiving now felt like a place where something unexpected had happened. A meeting of two worlds, a crack in the facade where real human connection had briefly shone through. He glanced at her again, the way she held herself, no longer just a frightened woman, but someone who had just shared a secret that cost her dearly. And he felt the fragile weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, not just to keep her safe in that moment, but to carry forward the understanding she had given him. The boy knew he couldn't pretend life was simple anymore. There were layers to every person's story, layers that needed to be seen and honored. The city around them buzzed with noise and life, but in that quiet space something had shifted inside him. He was no longer just a boy from the streets, and she was no longer just a millionaire. They were two human beings, caught in a moment where pain and hope intersected. He swallowed hard, feeling tears sting the back of his eyes, not just from her words, but from the sudden flood of emotions they unleashed within him. The boy wanted to hold on to that moment, to remember what it felt like to be truly seen and to see another so deeply, but he also knew the world outside was waiting, ready to pull them back into its harsh realities. The whispered confession echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder that beneath every surface, there are stories waiting to be heard, stories that could break hearts, build bridges, and change lives. As they stayed close in that dimly lit corner, the boy began to realize that their brief encounter was more than just a chance meeting. It was a mirror reflecting some harsh truths about the world they lived in. The millionaire's whispered confession was like a key that unlocked a hidden door, revealing the complexities beneath the surface of both their lives, and the sharp contrasts yet unexpected similarities between wealth and poverty. He thought about the streets he knew so well, the alleys where danger lurked, the harsh realities of hunger, fear, and violence that were a daily fight for survival. For him, the world was straightforward in its cruelty, but in a brutal way that demanded strength and resilience. Everything was raw and immediate. Life was a constant test, and there was little room for weakness or pretense. But now, standing beside this woman who had everything money could buy, he saw another kind of pain, one wrapped in luxury and isolation, cloaked in silence and invisible to the outside world. The loneliness she described wasn't born from a lack of resources, but from the weight of expectations, the constant pressure to maintain appearances, and the emotional isolation that came with living in a gilded cage. The boy's mind wandered to the stark divides that kept people like them worlds apart. Society painted their lives with broad strokes. He was just a poor kid from the streets, and she was a wealthy woman who would never need to worry about tomorrow. But the truth was far messier, tangled up in struggles that money couldn't solve, and scars no amount of luxury could heal. He realized that both their lives were shaped by forces beyond their control, the circumstances of their birth, the invisible systems that dictated opportunity and fate, and the judgments of a world quick to stereotype and separate. Yet here they were, two strangers connected by a violent moment and a whispered secret that tore down the walls between them. The encounter was a brutal reminder of how easily society overlooked the humanity in people, reducing them to labels like rich or poor, victim or savior. But the pain they each carried defied those categories. It was raw, real, and deeply human, and it showed that underneath all the masks, everyone carried wounds, some visible, some hidden, waiting to be understood. He thought about how she must have felt trapped in her own world, surrounded by people who saw her only as an icon of success and privilege, never as a person struggling with loneliness and fear. And he remembered how his own life was defined by the constant fight to be seen as more than just a poor kid, more than the circumstances that tried to keep him down. In that moment, he understood that their meeting was a powerful glimpse into the tangled realities of society, the harsh divide between wealth and poverty, and yet the shared human experiences that connected them in ways money could never buy. Their brief interaction was a spark, illuminating the invisible lines that divide people and the bridges that could be built when those lines are crossed. The boy felt a heavy weight settle on his chest, the burden of realizing how much pain goes unseen and unspoken on both sides of the divide. He thought about the woman's whispered words, the vulnerability she had risked sharing, and the courage it took to let a stranger see her true self in a moment of crisis. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that the true stories of people's lives were often hidden beneath layers of fear, pride, and silence. Both of them carried wounds inflicted by a world that demanded strength, but rarely offered understanding. As the night deepened, the boy felt something shift inside him, a growing awareness of the complexities of human pain and resilience, and the importance of empathy that transcends social boundaries. He realized that to truly see another person, to hear their whispered truths, was an act of courage and compassion that could change everything. The city's harsh lights and distant sounds faded into the background as he stood there, holding on to this newfound understanding. He knew that their encounter was a rare and fragile moment of truth in a world that often preferred to look away. Though they came from different worlds, their shared experience had peeled back the layers of judgment and fear, revealing the simple, undeniable truth. Beneath every surface lies a story waiting to be told, a pain waiting to be acknowledged, and a hope waiting to be nurtured. He looked at her once more, seeing not the millionaire or the victim, but a fellow human being caught in the relentless grip of life's challenges. And in that recognition, he found a quiet strength, an understanding that would stay with him long after the night ended. The boy knew deep down that this moment would never be forgotten. The brief encounter, the whispered confession, and the raw humanity they had shared had changed something inside him, something profound and irreversible. It was as if a door had been opened, revealing a world of complexity and connection he had never fully understood before. He could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing on his chest, not like a burden, but like a call to something greater. It was a challenge to his old way of seeing the world, a challenge to look beyond the surface and see people for who they truly were, with all their pain, fears, and hopes. This was not just a passing event, it was a turning point. The boy thought about the life he had lived so far, the struggles, the fights, the endless battles to survive in a world that often seemed stacked against him. But this moment had shown him that survival wasn't the only thing that mattered. There was something deeper, compassion, empathy, the courage to reach out even when it was hard or scary. He realized that the millionaire woman, with all her wealth and power, had been just as vulnerable and scared as he was. And in saving her, he had also saved a part of himself, a part that wanted to believe in kindness and human connection, even in the darkest places. Her whispered words had unlocked something inside him, a well of emotion he hadn't known he had. From that night forward, the boy carried a new kind of strength. It wasn't about money or status or toughness. It was about understanding and feeling deeply, about seeing the humanity in everyone he met. That strength gave him a new purpose, a reason to believe that he could make a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of others. He found himself looking at the world differently, noticing the small moments of pain and hope all around him. He began to understand that everyone has a story, and that sometimes the most powerful connections come from the most unexpected places. The night on the street had shown him that life was not just about where you came from or what you had, but about the moments when you dared to care. Even though their paths might never cross again, the boy knew that the millionaire's whispered confession had left a permanent mark on his soul. It was a reminder that beneath the surface, everyone carries hidden struggles, and that true courage is found in the willingness to see and be seen. He thought about how that moment had shifted the way he saw himself, not just as a poor boy from the streets, but as someone capable of bravery, kindness, and deep understanding. And though the future was uncertain, he felt ready to face it with open eyes and an open heart. The boy knew that life would continue to test him, that the streets would remain harsh and unforgiving, but now he carried something priceless with him, a glimpse of hope, a spark of empathy, and the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, connection and compassion could shine through. He would never forget the night he saved a millionaire woman, and the whispered words that made him cry, not because of sadness alone, but because they had awakened something inside him that could never be silenced.